Penguin Random House Audio presents Thank You for My Service by Matt Best, with Ross Patterson and Nils Parker. This is the author, Matt Best. For my beautiful mother, who has stood by me through success and failure while I chase my dreams, despite wishing for a girl when she was pregnant with me. Don't worry, Mom. There's hope for me yet. Bruce Jenner didn't transition until he was in his 60s. Chapter 1. Does anyone need a hand? As an Army Ranger and private military contractor, I had the honor and pleasure of spending some of the best years of my life defending what this country stands for. I did my thing in different areas of several countries over the better part of a decade. I saw a lot of death. I made a fair share of it myself, dispatching our enemies to the netherworld with extreme prejudice by any means necessary. I wore the uniform with immense pride and deep admiration for those who had worn it long before me, including my father, a Vietnam-era veteran. It was a privilege to be part of the military brotherhood that is second to none. After leaving the Army following 5 combat deployments, I never thought I'd be able to replicate the relationships I built within that brotherhood. I assumed that whatever I did next couldn't possibly offer the kind of camaraderie you develop by living and working with the same group of guys in war zones, on military bases, day in and day out. Over the years, however, I found ways to compensate for that in my personal life and my professional life. Early on, if I was missing one of the boys, I'd just hop on a plane and crash on his couch without giving him a chance to warn his wife, like a good friend is supposed to do. Later, to stay in touch, I'd start a group text and send a message like, Perfect 10, with a picture of Kim Jong-il's bullet-ridden face taped over a 10 ring at my local shooting range, which would inspire them to send range pics of their own, partly to join in the fun and partly to pretend like they're better shooters than me, which is about as pointless of an exercise as arguing on the internet. Eventually, though, as I moved on and moved around, and some of those older relationships faded into the background, I realized that camaraderie isn't something that only develops between people who share the same experience. It's also possible to develop it with new people who share the same values and have had the same types of experiences. Guys from the military can work and connect with each other outside of the military, too. The service is not only a place where you can create bonds with guys who know what it means to sacrifice, to suffer, and to shit in places with no doors on them. That isn't why I ultimately started a clothing company or a liquor company or joined forces to build a coffee company called Black Rifle Coffee, but it is why my partners and I prioritize hiring veterans. We know that they're looking for the same thing in the civilian world that we were, the ability to play with guns, dogs, and explosives, while doing some good and keeping our health benefits in the process. Starting a business by veterans for veterans is probably the closest I will ever come to recreating the emotions I felt and the bonds I enjoyed during my time with the Army and the redacted. Just so you guys know, some of the book got redacted for information by the Department of Defense. I will say redacted when that information was pulled, or I'll just skip over if it's not necessary for the story. Now, if I can only recreate the one thing I've missed more than anything, every waking moment of every day since I've left the military, the thrill of war. Silently hunting nature's most formidable opponent while implementing years of training to execute a precision raid? Yes, please. High-fiving some jihadi's face into martyrdom with a suppressed AR-15? That's just a warm slice of freedom pie with an ice-cold scoop of America on the side. Understanding the fragile, ephemeral nature of life and then being the one to snatch it away from some fucking terrorist who hates you and wants to kill you and everyone you care about? It's better than Chick-fil-A. And let's face it, nothing is better than Chick-fil-A. Yet, the most satisfying kind of war stories of all, karmically speaking, is when one of these dickless shitbirds suicide bombs himself into oblivion but fails to take anybody with him because he's fucking stupid. One night, deep in central Iraq on my 5th deployment, I had the great honor of watching the world's worst terrorist work his special brand of magic. Our target that night was a set of buildings that either housed or operated as a meeting place for an active cell of insurgents. When that many fighters gather in one place, there's usually a bunch of shit worth knowing about them. So, Our mission was to capture as many of them as we could for intelligence gathering purposes. We'd been watching these buildings through an ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance drone, for several hours prior to spinning up from base to confirm that everyone inside was a legitimate fighter. So, by the time we got up in the air, we knew that there was a high probability that they possessed information worth, how should I put this, extracting? Yeah, the Department of Defense will like that word. I'm going with extracting. The plan was to execute a basic offset infill, which means that the helicopters drop our teams off 3 to 6 kilometers from the target location so that the enemy can't hear us and we can use the cover of darkness to walk in and fuck their souls in the middle of the night. Everything was going according to plan on our flight into the HLZ, helicopter landing zone, when, wouldn't you know it, the drone feed showed 6 enemy combatants run out from one of the buildings carrying AK-47s, RPGs, and PKMs. Belt-fed machine guns, guys, come on. They jumped into a truck and took off. In the military, we have a name for guys like this, enemy combatants who catch wind of about, 20 to 25 inbound Americans and choose flight over fight. We call them squirters because they're usually holed up inside of some juicy soft target where, if you apply enough consistent, vigorous pressure in just the right way, from front or the rear, eventually something's coming out. The only questions are how much, how fast, and in what direction. Back at the base, our drone operator retasked the ISR to chase the squirters as we touched down, jumped out of the helicopter, and started hiking towards the target. About halfway there, we spotted their truck trying to outflank our element. Since they were mobile and we were on foot, our ground force commander immediately cleared the AC-130 gunship to orient to their position and say hello with its 105 howitzer shells and its 40mm Bofors cannons. A few minutes later, listening to the radio chatter in my capacity as a team leader, 2 facts soon became clear. 1, the AC-130 had disabled the vehicle, displacing the combatants, and 2, my squad of 9 men would reroute to find and handle them while the rest of the platoon headed to the target buildings. I leaned into my team. Guys, just so you know, I guarantee most of them will still be alive when we clear through, so be ready. Load your 40 mic, and make sure you're ready to get nasty. By this point in my service, I'd been through enough combat that I didn't fuck around anymore. If I thought there was a credible threat in front of us, we were going in like a Ruth's Chris baked potato, fully loaded and doming assholes. If I was pieing a hillside and saw what looked like to be a dead body laying motionless in the brush, I'd put one through its head just to be sure, because half of the time, the guy wasn't dead at all. When you came up on his position, you'd discover that he was alive and armed, hoping that you'd let your guard down. Or, if he was even more patient, he might wait until you got close enough and then blow himself up. After enough of that kind of shit, there was no hesitation or cautious optimism left inside of me. If they were known combatants, we made sure that they were dead as we tidied up the mess that they had made. Once we were all squared away, my squad slowly made its way to the squirters' last known position. Distance-wise, it wasn't that far, but time-wise, you never knew how long it could take. The undulations of the Iraqi desert consistently mess with your depth perception, so when you're looking for something that you didn't have a fixed position on, it almost always caught you by surprise when you finally found it. 10 minutes in, we saw a flickering glow on the horizon. We'd all seen that glow before. Most of us in the squad had made that glow one time or another. Vehicle fire. The glow guided our way, but we actually ended up hearing the vehicle before we saw it. The heat of the fire was cooking off all the 7.62 AK-47 rounds still in the bed of the truck, and the noise was echoing out in all directions. Following the sound, we crested a berm and finally came up on the burning vehicle. The fire was so powerful that it had completely engulfed the truck and nearly whited out all of our night vision goggles. It also did that weird thing that fire does where it illuminates everything in the foreground but makes it impossible to see anything behind it. To avoid getting clipped by one of the combatants hiding in the blind spot, we organized our assault in a linear formation. This would also reduce the odds of getting fragged by the truck firing AK-47 rounds in every direction like a drunk Decepticon. From the ISR footage, we knew that there were 6 of these mangy cats we had to herd. We found the first 3 right away, lying on the ground in front of the burning vehicle with their weapons beside them. They were playing dead.